Hippocrates said all disease begins in the gut. Perhaps another way of thinking about this is death begins in the gut.
Dr. Gundry is one of the world's top cardiothoracic surgeons. He has operated in more than 20 countries, and then something changed. He is now a pioneer in nutrition, author of 4 New York Times bestsellers. By the time you hear this, he will have recently released his next book, Gut Check: Unleash the Power of Your Microbiome to Reverse Disease and Transform Your Mental, Physical, and Emotional Health. Could you give us some details about what ultimately caused you to have this significant pivot?
I had an epiphany. Mainstream medicine doesn't want people to know about leaky guts because 100% of people who I see with leaky gut have antibodies to the various forms of wheat. What's exciting is you literally can retrain your immune system.
People are playing around and they want to go carnivore, they want to go vegan. What would you say might be the best way to test the value of those protocols?
Well,
What 2 to 3 protocols, habits, mindsets, let's call them shortcuts, to longevity and a long health span would you share?
the first shortcut is
Hi, my name is Chris Burris. I'm a longevity expert and the chief scientist at a lab focused on a longevity molecule. My primary focus is to help people live longer and better lives with science. Make sure to subscribe and share so you and your friends can live longer and better. Well, actually, so you and your friends can live beyond the norms. I could not be more excited to welcome Dr. Gundry. Dr. Gundry, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Chris, nice to see you again. Thank you for having me on the program.
All right, so I did something dangerous I have to share. I went to our old interview on YouTube, and we did that early in 2020. I pulled one of the comments, so you know that could be really dangerous, but here is the comment. What a fantastic interview. 2 super funny and intelligent men. So I just wanted to share that because now we got a lot to live up to, right?
Oh, okay.
All right.
We feel on both counts, funny and intelligent. So, well.
And there were some comments about our glasses, so I thought that was kind of cool. All right. So life is often about inflection points. Some call them tipping points. Those points in your life when you make a shift. You have such a tipping point. And before that tipping point, you don't just have a career in medicine. You don't just have a career as a surgeon. You don't just have a career as a heart surgeon. You don't just have a career as a pediatric heart surgeon. You really have a storied career as a pediatric heart surgeon, eventually serving as the chairman and head of cardiothoracic surgery at Loma Linda University. This is actually not the type of career that typically experiences a tipping point, a significant pivot, but you have that. Can I ask you first, why did you get into medicine in the beginning? And then why heart surgery? And then could you give us some details about what ultimately caused you to have this significant pivot?
Sure. I guess I decided to become a doctor at age 10 when I found a book in my elementary school in Omaha, Nebraska called All About You. And I literally did my 4th grade science project on how to do an appendectomy, that I did all the illustrations myself, and people accused me of doing the appendectomy on my sister, which is not true.
There is no record of that event.
She had an appendectomy, but I didn't do it. So when I was lucky enough to get into medical school at Medical College of Georgia in Augusta, one of the things that they did was from day one, you were mentored by a faculty member. And it just so happens that my mentor was William Strong, who was a pediatric cardiologist. He was the head of pediatric cardiology. And so I would follow him around every week as part of my education. And by the time I was advanced in years in medical school, he said, you're going to make a great pediatric cardiologist. And I said, well, this is great. I love finding out what's wrong with these kids, but I'm sorry, I gotta fix the problem. And he said, I knew you were hopeless. I should have never taken you on. So I actually, went out and trained to be a heart surgeon and a pediatric heart surgeon. So that's how I ended up what I do. Why an inflection point? Well, I eventually became, like you mentioned, a professor and chairman of cardiothoracic surgery at Loma Linda. I was very famous for operating on babies and doing baby heart transplants with my partner, Leonard Bailey, who's recently deceased. But I was also famous for operating on people who nobody else wanted to operate on. And there were a few of us, always are a few idiots who will take on stupid cases that are very high risk. And so I was introduced to a guy who I talk about in all my books, who I call Big Ed. And he was a 48-year-old man from Miami, Florida, who had inoperable coronary artery disease. What that means is it was so crudded up in your coronary arteries that you couldn't put stents in them. You couldn't do a bypass because there wasn't any place to land a bypass because it was all full of crud. And so he would go around with his angiogram of the vessels of his heart to various centers in the United States. And there was kind of a rotation. We all knew who we were, and everybody knew who we were. So he spent 6 months going around to these centers, and everywhere he went, everybody turned him down. No, can't help you. Bye. So after about 6 months of doing this, he wound up at Loma Linda, and I look at his angiogram, the movie of his heart, and I go, I'd really love to help you, Big Ed. Now, the reason he's Big Ed is he weighed 265 pounds when I met him, okay? So I said, everybody's right. We're not going to be able to do anything for you. He says, well, that's what everybody says. But here's the deal. I've gone on a diet and I've lost 45 pounds in the last 6 months. Now, this is a guy who's 265 when I meet him. And he said, I went to a health food store and I bought all these supplements. And he literally had brought in this big shopping bag full of supplements. And he said, maybe I did something in here. And I go, well, I'm scratching my professor beard and, good for you for losing all that weight, but that's not going to do anything to your heart. And I said, I know what you did with all the supplements. You made expensive urine, which is what I firmly believe. And he said, well, what would it hurt? I've come all this way from Miami. Why don't we get a new angiogram, a new movie of my arteries? And I, sigh and don't get your hopes up. But so we get a new angiogram. And in 6 months' time, this guy's cleaned out 50% of the blockages in his heart. Gone.
Wow.
Now, that's impossible. I mean, it's literally impossible. But I'm looking at it. I'm looking at the two. So I start asking him, wait a minute. Tell me about this diet. And of interest to our listeners, I went to Yale as an undergraduate back in the dark ages. And as part of that, we could actually design our own major. And you basically had a master's thesis that you had to defend. And my thesis was you could take a great ape, manipulate its food supply, manipulate its environment, and prove you'd arrive at a human being. So I wrote my thesis and defended my thesis and got an honors, and I gave it to my parents and went off and became a very famous heart surgeon. So as Big Ed is telling me about the foods he was eating, I'm going, wait a minute. That's my thesis that I wrote in Yale about what ancient man ate. And I called my parents and I said, do you have my thesis? It's actually up there in the bookcase now. And they said, yeah, it's in the shrine. And so I said, send it up. So I said, well, wait a minute. Let me look at these supplements. Now, one of the things I didn't mention, I was very famous for keeping hearts alive for heart transplant. And I invented a bunch of devices that protect the heart during heart surgery. It's still the number one used device, even now. And I was putting various ingredients in the veins and arteries of the heart, injecting them. And Big Ed, I started looking through this, and he's swallowing a lot of the ingredients that I was mixing up to protect the heart. And it never occurred to me to swallow them. So why that's so interesting is even though I was a famous heart surgeon, I was 70 pounds overweight, even though I was running 30 miles a week, going to the gym 1 hour a day. I had high blood pressure, pre-diabetes, bad arthritis, migraine headaches while doing baby heart transplants. Don't recommend it.
Mm.
And so when I saw what happened to Big Ed, I said, well, I think I'll experiment with myself. And so I put myself on my thesis and I started swallowing a bunch of supplements. And lo and behold, I lost 50 pounds my first year and another 20 pounds that I've cupped off for over 20 years. And I started, my blood pressure went away, my arthritis went away, my migraine headaches went away. So after this happened to me, the people I would operate on at Loma Linda, I would
These are like the crazy cases that are seeking you out. Is that where you were at with these typical people?
Yeah. And so I would after I operated on them, I would put them on this program, and I'd send them to Costco or Trader Joe's. There wasn't an Amazon back then, and have them buy some supplements. And lo and behold, these things would work on them. So after about a year of doing this at Loma Linda, I had an epiphany one morning before I went to work. I said, I've got this all wrong. I shouldn't operate on them and then teach them how to avoid me. I should teach them how to eat, and I'll never have to operate on them in the first place. That's a really bad career move for a heart surgeon. So, I talked to my wife and she said, this is really stupid. And I said, yeah, what? So at the height of my career, I resigned my position and went to Palm Springs, which is just down the road from Loma Linda, and set up a clinic and said, hey, I want to ask you to eat certain foods, and I want to ask you not to eat certain foods, and I want to send you to the health food store and buy some supplements. And every 3 months, I want to draw blood work on you, and let's see what happens. I'm a researcher, and so that's actually how it all started. And that that was a really bad idea for a long number of years because you can't make a lot of money teaching people how to eat. It's not a good career decision. But yeah,
So I've got 10-year-old mapping out surgeries. I've got a grade ape thesis, right? Like this is the progression, and then a mentor as a pediatric heart surgeon, and then we'll call it the stupid case guy phase. Is that? and then you're also mixing chemicals and getting patents with heart related to heart surgeries, and then Big Ed walks in and he's actually solved the problem before you had the chance to get in there because there was no way to operate. I just find it fascinating. This is no critique. How sometimes you look in hindsight and you're like, well, I should have immediately started putting nutrition first before surgeries, right? But your mindset is a certain way, and this is how every human is. Right? Sometimes it takes a while for that to click, and then also there's this kind of inherent pressure of, well, I've got this career and now I'm going to walk away from this career. Heart surgeons do pretty well, I would imagine. And like, now I'm going to open a clinic. So that's an exciting story. And I'll just start right here by saying thank you because, it's impacted a lot of people in amazing ways. And I'm looking forward to the reaction to Gut Check just as you continue to get that message. Now speaking of Gut Check, I did a little research. There are 647 citations or references in Gut Check. That's a lot of research. How long does it take you typically to write a book?
Well, after the Plant Paradox came out just about 7 years ago now. I was writing a book a year. It's been a year and a half between unlocking the keto code and Gut Check. So that's a long time for me. But each book, I don't write a book just to write a book. It's literally to kind of follow up on some rabbit hole I went down in writing the previous book, or something that I discovered in my clinics, I still see patients 6 days a week,
Mm.
even Saturdays and Sundays. So um, you're right. It takes a lot of research. The weird thing is, I don't even do an outline when I'm writing a book because I almost always change what I'm going to write about as I'm writing, because I head down rabbit holes and go, oh my gosh, I didn't know that, and I'm going to do this. So
So about a year, typically a year and a half on this. And yeah, that makes sense as I'm thinking about it. And I agree with rabbit holes for each of the interviews for this longevity summit. I really went down multiple rabbit holes with each of the 55 speakers, and where I thought I was going to start in terms of questioning and whatever. Your book landed in my lap after we had scheduled things, and so that's a different rabbit hole, which is very cool. In what ways has your content evolved from, say, plant paradox to gut check?
so I think one of the purposes of gut check is the plant paradox was written right as the human microbiome project was being completed. And uh, with every literally passing day, we learn more about the human microbiome. And I've learned now, 7 more years of patient experience that I didn't have when I wrote the Plant Paradox. And one of the chapters, the concluding chapter, is Plant Paradox 2.0, which is okay. Here's what I didn't tell you or I didn't know, and here's what I know now. And you can hate me even more than you hated me when I wrote the Plant Paradox, but here's what you need to know, and here's the complexity of the relationship and the control over almost everything that's going to happen to us that the microbiome exerts, and more and more detail about how leaky gut, intestinal permeability, is not pseudoscience. It's real, it's measurable, and here's what happens. So that's the difference.
That's the difference. And okay, so talking about leaky gut, your newest book mentions leaky gut 103 times, right? It's leaky gut equals leaky joints. Leaky gut equals leaky metabolism. Leaky gut equals leaky bones. Leaky gut equals leaky brain. Leaky gut equals leaky hormones. All right, Dr. Gundry, we get it. Leaky gut, not good. You even say in your book that maybe 20 years ago, if somebody had asked you, you would have said leaky gut's probably in the realm of pseudoscience. And I believe, and you kind of alluded, like it's shifting, but I still think a lot of the medical community throws it in as pseudoscience, and correct me if that's a misinterpretation. And if it's true, why do you think that they think that? And then can you walk us through your journey of really understanding that it's not pseudoscience and it has a massive impact on health?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Hippocrates, the father of medicine, 2,500 years ago, said all disease begins in the gut. And I guess this book is my attempt to prove he was right. Every day I'm trying to figure out, how did this guy know this? And you could better paraphrase it. I talked to some GI doctors in Paris a couple of years ago. All disease begins in a leaky gut. Uh, but he was the father of this, and we now know that we can measure intestinal permeability. So if you can measure it, it's no longer pseudoscience. You can measure the degree of intestinal permeability, leaks, and you can measure it resolving. You can show, and I've published papers on this, that you can put leaky gut away. You can cure leaky gut. And one of the real fathers of this is Alessio Fasano, who's Now at Harvard, he was at the University of Maryland, a pediatric gastroenterologist who was trying to figure out how gluten, which happens to be a lectin, caused celiac disease, the extreme form of leaky gut. And he was the guy who figured this out. Recently, I was on a podcast debating a vegan cardiologist, and that's not really the point, but the vegan cardiologist said, well, leaky gut, that's pseudoscience. And I'm, looking at this person and I'm going, no, it's actually measurable. She said, well, says who? And I said, well, I measure it in my clinics every day with, labs that quantify this. Well, what does that have to do with anything? And I said, well, Alessio Fasano has written some rather impressive papers about this in Nature. And she said, oh, are you name dropping? Is that supposed to make me believe in it? And I'm going, okay, that's fine. Yeah, so you're right. Mainstream medicine, number one, mainstream medicine doesn't want people to know about leaky guts because it certainly goes against the allopathic model of let's get some drugs in you. About 80% of my practice now is autoimmune disease. And these people, 100% of them have leaky gut. And I published papers that 94% of these people go into remission when literally all measurements of their autoimmune disease are gone in 9 months to a year. And we can track when their leaky gut is sealed, they go into remission. And it's science, not pseudoscience.
So Dr. Tom O'Brien is one of the speakers on the summit, and he wrote the Autoimmune Fix, and he talks about the wheat zoomer. And in your book, you say start with the wheat zoomer, which is our test for leaky gut. And in my mind, I was like, well, wheat zoomer I thought was test for gluten. Is it possible that you're okay with wheat, still have a leaky gut, and that wheat zoomer test will pick up on it, or do you have to lean on another test if you don't have kind of a wheat sensitivity?
Well, the wheat zoomer is the leaky gut test for Vibrant America, Vibrant Wellness. And the wheat zoomer was developed before Zoom calls, and it's a stupid name. They didn't ask me. I was actually an advisor to the company when they first started. There's a lectin zoomer. You can guess where that idea came from. But the wheat zoomer also looks at the various antibodies to the various components of wheat, like wheat germ agglutinin, gluten, and non-wheat proteins. So that's where that term came from. Unfortunately, that's their leaky gut test. Now, interestingly enough, 100% of people who I see with leaky gut when they walk into my clinic have antibodies to the various forms of wheat. 100%. Now, what's exciting is that those antibodies resolve within a year of when they start the program. So they no longer have wheat antibodies when they finish the program. So you literally can retrain your immune system.
Are we looking at kind of the way you just described it there? And I don't think this is true, but is really leaky gut entirely caused by wheat, or there are other components that? Okay, so there are other components that can cause it.
Oh yeah,
it just happens. Is it maybe more severe if 100% of your patients have kind of wheat sensitivities, right? But other things can be the problem. How does that resolve? So first off, like, what are some of the other things, maybe in rank order to the best of your ability, that might cause problems?
Well, so one of the things I wrote about in the plant paradox, which has since been confirmed, if you take people with celiac disease, which is the extreme form of wheat intolerance, gluten intolerance, and you diagnose in this paper celiac disease with intestinal biopsies, which is the gold standard, and put them on a gluten-free diet for a year and a half, 70% of these people will still have celiac on repeat biopsy, even though they're following a gluten-free diet. Part of the problem is about 70% of people who are sensitive to wheat react to corn and have antibodies to corn. And unfortunately, much of gluten-free foods are corn-based. And we see a lot of these people who've been avoiding wheat or gluten, but they're eating corn chips or corn tortillas or corn bread because it's safe. Similarly, oats have a protein that cross-reacts with gluten. Many of the non-gluten foods like quinoa, for example, brown rice, also have proteins that we react to, and we can test for these things. So that's just the grain and the pseudo grain family. Unfortunately, buckwheat has a really nasty lectin. Darn it. And there's other lectin containing foods that are, and a lot of my autoimmune patients, which surprised me, react to most forms of dairy and react to egg yolks and egg whites. Quite a number of them, unfortunately.
So it would be possible that your reaction is to say egg whites, right? And would that particular situation, maybe it just hasn't happened in your clinic, but is that a situation that would show up on a wheat zoomer, or that ends up?
Yeah, you would see it as intestinal permeability, but you may not have any antibodies or very few antibodies to wheat or gluten. But as I talk about it in the new book, about 90% of people who followed the plant paradox would resolve their issue. And about 10% didn't. And even in my practice, 10% of people were troublemakers. And
the canaries, right? I think you called them canaries.
Yeah, they're troublemakers. So when we started adding these additional zoomers like the corn zoomer and the lectin zoomer and the egg zoomer and the dairy zoomer and the food sensitivity test, which is very different than food allergies, then we would spot, okay, oh my gosh, eggs are a big troublemaker for you. And I'm sorry. I'll give you a wonderful story. A person fairly high up in one of the social media companies had a very painful autoimmune disease and was referred to me. And we did these Zoomer tests on him, and he had wide open leaky gut. And he also reacted to dairy and reacted to eggs and so forth. And so I said, okay, we're gonna take eggs away from you. And he says, you can't do that. And I said, what do you mean? He says, I have an omelet every day of my life. You can't do that. And I'm going, well, you're the guy with the pain. He says, okay. So we go along and his pain resolves. He's off of his 2 medications, biologics. And about 9 months in, he's pretty much healed his leaky gut. And he says, can we retest me for eggs, please? And I go, sure. And so we retest him for eggs. Well, now he's still sensitive to egg yolks, but he's no longer sensitive to egg whites. So I meet with him in the office. I said, good news. You can have an egg white omelet. And he said, this is the best news. This is great.
Even better than feeling better is the fact that I can go back to eating eggs.
Yeah. Eggs again, or I have egg whites. So 2.5 days go by, and he calls me on the phone on the 3rd day. He says, I am in such pain. And I go, what did you do? And he said, well, you know how you told me I could have an egg white omelet? I said, yeah. He says, well, 2 days ago, I had an egg white omelet for breakfast, one for lunch, one for dinner. Yesterday, I had one for breakfast, one for lunch, one for dinner. And I was just cooking my egg white omelet this morning when it occurred to me that maybe that was too quick. And I said, yeah, goodbye. And true story, very smart individual. the good news is now he has regular eggs, but yeah, you just can't jump in the deep end.
Yeah, he was trying to make up for that lost time, right? Like, hey, I had missed all those months or maybe a year.
Oh, yeah.
You are enjoying, well, at least I hope you're enjoying the Live Beyond the Norms podcast. Make sure you subscribe, make sure you follow, and make sure you share. But don't be that annoying guy, whatever you do. Don't share it with people who aren't actually interested in living beyond the norms. So we're talking about our intestines, right? And this subject came up in your book and came up probably 2 other times. And to be honest, I brought it up. There are some amazing studies on fecal transplants, right? You cover kind of mice getting or curing. So like either not having Alzheimer's and then getting Alzheimer's, or having Alzheimer's and getting rid of it with fecal transplants. You talk about eliciting major depressive disorder symptoms in mice, alleviating colloiditis in mice. Should we just be getting fecal transplants? Is that maybe a shortcut?
Well, a big problem with that. Mice and rats love to eat feces.
Anyway,
They think feces are delicious, and so unfortunately, so good news is you can do a fecal transplant without giving the mouse an enema.
Yep.
Because their system is well designed, they're not going to get, quote, infected by eating feces. Now, unfortunately, humans, first of all, I think correctly, the FDA takes a very dim view of fecal transplants because there have been some mischief from them. There are crapsules that have been tried, and there's actually been a very good autism study giving kids with pretty severe autism crapsules with a lot of other. It was a very well designed study and show that you can definitely dramatically improve the symptoms of autism in these kids with fecal transplants, if you will. But no, and nobody needs to have a fecal transplant. I got interested in this, and I've written about this when I was in medical school at Medical College of Georgia. This was in the mid 1970s when broad spectrum antibiotics were first introduced. And they were miraculous because we could literally shotgun an infection. We could carpet bomb an infection with antibiotics that would kill everything. And we wouldn't have to guess or culture what the bacteria was. We just
Someone's having a bad experience, give them the broad spectrum, and then we're done. Yeah.
Exactly. And it was miraculous in a lot of ways. The problem was we had no idea that we were also killing off this, 100 trillion bacteria that live in your gut, particularly the good ones. And so we began to see what was then called pseudomembranous enterocolitis. And we now know it as C. difficile, C. diff. And this was an overgrowth of a bacteria that's normal to our intestines, but all the other guys who were keeping this guy in check were gone. So these guys were having a field day, and these people were really deathly ill, and we had no treatment for them. So one of my mentors, Arlie Mansberger, said, I think there's something going on that we've killed off, bacteria too much. And you medical students, once a week, you're going to go take a crap in what we called the honey pot. And we would take it back to his lab in a wearing blender and homogenize it. And then we'd put it in an enema bag, medical student poop, and shove it up these poor people's rear end. And within days, they were completely cured.
And the people were having C. diff issues, right?
Oh, okay, yeah. They had C. diff. Yeah. I mean, they had pseudomonas. I mean, there was no hope for them. They usually died. And he would do these sigmoidoscopes, and we had all these cool pictures of just the inside of their colon. It looked like a war zone, looked like Gaza. And then in 3 days, it looked pristine and beautiful. And everybody thought he was just the kookiest, craziest guy. But this was back in the 1970s. And so I got to witness firsthand the power of medical student poop.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that in either plant paradox or longevity. I don't think that that subject came up again in gut check.
No,
But I remember that, and in my mind, I was like, the adage is like, all I need is the blood of a young boy, and I can be healthy. And really, what you need is the poop of a young boy, and then you'll be healthy.
there's probably some truth to that as well. Yeah.
And maybe you need a little bit of both. And so yeah, it makes sense if you're doing fecal transplants and they have some sort of bacteria that maybe your system doesn't know how to manage, then it can end up in your system, and that's probably the wonkiness that you mentioned has gone awry from time to time, because you're dealing with all of these bacteria. How do you selectively take care of the bad gut guys and make sure that the gut buddies are staying around? That's your phrase for gut buddies. I interviewed several biological age testing experts for this summit. My DNA age, glycan age. Have you played around with these age tests, and have you kind of played around with them with patients?
No.
Nope.
Uh,
What are your
uh,
thoughts then on these tests?
have a nice day. Uh, you spend your money the way you want to, but don't waste your money. And there was just an article, actually, I sent to my PA yesterday that these things are not ready for prime time.
I think it's an interesting concept, right? Because you're just aggregating data, and this is where people tend to stay relative, whether it's glycans or whether it's whatever methylation.
Yeah.
But if you're off of where you're supposed to be, what is the real meaning of that? I think that's a legitimate question. Do you have something that you would say better? Because people are trying different protocols for longevity, right? Like, let me do intermittent fasting. Let me do make sure I'm getting my 7.5 to 9 hours of sleep. Let me
Yeah.
change my diet. Maybe people are playing around and they want to go carnivore. Or they want to go vegan, which I think both of those are interesting and probably not the right answer. What would you say might be the best way to test the value of those protocols?
Well, as I tell my patients or anybody who will listen, if I had one blood test that would tell me my best chances to live a long time, that would be a fasting insulin level.
Mm.
And I have third year family practice medicines rotate through my clinics, and they have never heard of a fasting insulin level. And these are people who are about to go into practice. The second thing, that if I'm over 40, the other test I would get is a insulin like growth factor 1, IGF-1. Right now, the best stand-in for mTOR activation is insulin like growth factor 1. And you look at super old people, and I take care of a lot of super old people in my practice, they tend to run insulin like growth factors of, I'll just throw out numbers, 50 to 70. There's papers that have been published in the last few years that the higher your insulin like growth factor, the more likely you are to develop cancer.
Mm.
And the lower your insulin like growth factor, the less likely you are to develop cancer. And that's certainly been true in my practice. I've only seen one human being in the last 23 years with a low insulin like growth factor develop cancer.
Mm.
Almost all of my other cancer patients have had an elevated insulin like growth factor.
Are
So,
just kind of makes me think, are people still continuing to come to you kind of in the heart condition realm, or is it now just across the board? We'll call them. Are you still the stupid case guy who takes on these cases and addresses people in kind of different situations?
different situations. I have a big cancer practice. a big diabetes practice, still heart disease. But again, 80% of my patients are autoimmune patients
Mm.
who want to get off their biologics or are on one or two biologics and are having side effects, or they haven't resolved their issue. And they've learned or seen that um, we're pretty good at reversing these things by our protocol. So yeah, no, I cover the game. I still see patients 6 days a week, um, Saturdays and Sundays, and the seventh day is Friday, and I'm at Gundry MD, my food and supplement company. So I still see, I work 7 days a week, and people go, well, what do you do that for? How stupid is that? Well, because usually I get to see something cool every day of somebody turning something around.
Yeah, I have a hard time. I don't work as much as you, and some of that is my wife, and I actually appreciate that. But I have a hard time picturing myself slowing down to the point of calling it any sort of retirement. That just doesn't seem. So you mentioned fasting insulin, right? IGF-1. When people first come to you, are they doing a whole gamut of Zoomers, or is there like one? Are you looking more at like food sensitivity? What's your first focus there?
Well, so if we've got somebody with an autoimmune disease, then we do the whole gamut of Zoomers, and we've never regretted, nor have they, getting them. Uh, if we if we don't, or if we're not dealing with autoimmune disease, but we have people who have markers of inflammation like C-reactive protein, just to throw out one, then we'll usually start them on our regular program without doing a Zoomer. And if we're making progress, great. If we make progress, but then we kind of hit a wall, then we'll say, let's see, where we are on the spectrum of leaky gut, and then we'll usually get a wheat Zoomer and often a food sensitivity as a way of, okay, let's see where we are.
Okay. You talk about cooking, cooling, and then reheating resistant starches. I throw sweet potatoes in the microwave for 4 minutes basically every night. Talk about that cooking and reheating process and its impact, and then maybe I need to change something.
Yeah. So I have a lot of patients who we take away their lectin containing foods. For instance, a regular potato has lectins in them. Sweet potatoes don't, and they'll get going on. They'll eat a lot of sweet potatoes, and they're happy, but their insulin might be going up. Their triglycerides, which come from sugars and starches, are going up. And we'll go, you're eating a lot of starches, and I don't think they're very resistant. And they look at me funny. So resistant starches, as the name implies, are starches that are resistant to our digestive enzymes. And the object of the game, if you're a good gut buddy, is to have something coming down from the mouth that eventually gets down to the colon where they're waiting for their dinner. And the harder it is to break starches apart, the more likely that some of these starches will make it down to the colon where most of our gut buddies live. And so what's cool is you can take a starch like a sweet potato or rice, as an example, cook it, but then cool it, throw it in the refrigerator or even set it out overnight, and then reheat it. And a greater percentage of those starch molecules will become resistant. In fact, I'll tell you a fascinating story. Part of my training in children's heart surgery was in London, England. And one of the oddest things when I was over there, that the English always served toast on a toast rack, and it was cold. and the butter didn't even spread well on it. And I'm going, this is really stupid. Why in the world would you serve cold toast? Um, and then when I started reading the literature, it turns out that toasting something and then cooling it makes the starch more resistant to digestion. And it's like, holy cow, that's why they did it. It wasn't because it was cold toast is delicious. It was taking a really bad thing for you and making it less bad.
Someone had the intuition to know that they felt bad and then noticed that they didn't feel as bad. I think that intuition, and just going back to toast, it just seems, I don't know, bizarre that wheat is such a staple, like just across the globe, and still is such a challenge. I think some of it is, and you talk about this in your books, kind of older processes of making it, sourdough bread significantly than other. Is that really what it boils down to? Is like maybe we would have never settled on wheat if we didn't figure out how to process it and not feel like garbage after we ate it.
Yeah, and really kind of from day one, there's an interesting theory, which I'm actually more intrigued. Wheat, agriculture in general was so bad for us. I mean, we shrunk a foot in 2000 years after agriculture. And most modern diseases started happening with agriculture. But there's a theory, which is kind of fun, that probably we didn't start eating wheat to eat wheat. Wheat was really good to ferment into beer. And that if you think about it, being crammed into tight spaces and being sedentary, that alcohol may have been the reason that we actually tolerated all these bad things that happened to us. And yeah, think about that for a while.
I can tell you, really, since reading Plant Paradox and Longevity Paradox, is really when I kind of noticed I don't feel so great after beer. Like I'm about to do a week of a couple beers a day because my brother-in-law absolutely loves beer, and so I'm gonna go down that. But other than that week where we kind of bond over that garbage, I just don't enjoy it. I don't like how I feel after, and I noticed that after kind of was brought to my attention. So what you're saying is beer causes people to do crazy things.
Yeah, or tolerate being around people, maybe is another way to put it. But yeah, it's an interesting theory. But yeah, if you think about it, there were so many bad things that happened from agriculture that you do wonder why in the world any of us back then submitted to that. And maybe that's the reason.
Beer, the answer and cause of all life's problems. I think that's a Homer Simpson's quote at some point. The first analogy in Gut Check references a big party. And then you have an analogy for mitochondria, which I love, the hottest new club in town called Mito Club.
Yeah.
Wine is on your okay list, right? I mean, of course, not too much. I have the impression you're a fun guy. What do you do for fun?
Well, I guess I see patients. No, my wife and I love to hike, and we spend actually a lot of time, particularly in Italy and France, hiking in the hills. We like to go find. We seek out what are called white roads. These are literally roads that are unpaved, going to little villages, and we just head on up there. Luckily, my wife is pretty fluent in French. I'm not good at Italian, but I'm really good with my hands. And that's what
I think that makes you fluent in Italian. I think
exactly. And we'll head into these little villages and go to a cafe and watch what they eat, and talk to them, and that to us is fun. So there you go.
That sounds amazing. All right, so I've got a couple of wrap up questions. The first one is, Do you have a target age that you want to live to?
Well, Dave Asprey thinks he's going to live to 170, maybe 150. No, I don't want to live that long. As far as I know, uh, I've followed a number of patients into their mid to late 100s, and I guess the answer is as long as I'm doing well and as long as my brain works, which these people did, then that seems to be in a perfectly appropriate time length of time. One of my patients who I give tribute to in the longevity paradox, Edith Murray, died in her sleep 2 weeks before her 106th birthday, and the day before she was walking her Pomeranian, in Palm Springs on the in El Paseo. And if that's a pretty good run. I think more importantly, another thing, you look at these super centenarians, and they all have a purpose
Mm.
that a lot of them say, I can't die because I've got to be here for, the current generation to tell them what I know, to tell them what I've learned. And I'm a resource that they need. And again, that's why I keep working. I just, as long as I'm a resource, then let's just keep at it. If I'm The last thing I want to do is drool in my oatmeal in the nursing home.
This is going to start to be really intertwined, but how long do you think humans can live?
Well, we certainly know they can live to 120, maybe 123. I'm intrigued with this, with biblical texts of people living, 200-300 years. Um, is that possible? Well, certainly not with our current technology, but um, I think it's possible. Then you go, well, how are you going to afford it? Is the next question. So that's why I have to keep worrying. So
Yeah. What 2 to 3 protocols, habits, mindsets, let's call them shortcuts because everybody likes shortcuts, to longevity and a long health span would you share?
I think the first shortcut is get your vitamin D level as high as humanly possible. There's very good correlation with vitamin D levels and longevity. A lot of it has to do with the intactness of the gut wall. And I think we don't spend enough time in longevity circles. If you look at the C. elegans model, this cute little worm, which has stood the test of time in longevity, C. elegans lives only as long as the wall of its gut is intact. And as that wall breaks down, the worm starts to break down. And I think we forget at our peril that as the wall of our gut breaks down, we break down. And just like Hippocrates said, all disease begins in the gut, perhaps another way of thinking about this is death begins in the gut.
Mm.
And so the more effort I spend on protecting my gut wall, I think I'll be paid back in spades.
And so
So that's
that's with vitamin D. That's focusing on vitamin D. Yeah.
vitamin D, number one. Number two, you brought it up earlier: intermittent fasting, time restricted eating. There's very good data that in humans that I talk about in the books of time restricted eating, limiting an eating window to 6 to 7 hours a day, lowering insulin like growth factor. And I want to keep mine nice and low. So that's an easy trick to do that. The other thing, getting back to kind of rule number one, is digestion is really hard on the wall of the gut. It's work.
Mm.
And we forget, I think, to our peril, that the more downtime we have for our gut in a 24-hour cycle, the more repair work that can be done. And I talk about the Mito Club. You got to have time to clean up the Mito Club. You got to clean up the beer bottles and all the trash. So the longer you have for repair, and this goes into intermittent fasting, the more your gut wall can be intact. So those are two easy to apply tricks.
And I think you change your fast schedule, right? Summer, winter. What does that look like again?
Yeah. Usually from January 1st, which is right now, to June 30th, I eat in a 2 hour window.
Mm.
Usually during the week. I sometimes take a little off on the weekends, and then I go to a 6 hour window during the rest of the year. Why do I do that? If you look at our ancient ancestors, food was not really very available in the winter and spring. And we would go through cycles of feasting and fasting. And I like to duplicate that. I actually purposely try to gain about 10 pounds every summer and fall. And then I usually take it off every winter. And why? Because that was actually one of the things that was interesting from my thesis at Yale is that great apes only gain weight in the summer and fall.
Mm.
And then they take it off through the winter. So I just want to be a good grade ape one day.
And your kind of explanation of like fructose as typically being available in the spring and the fall,
Right.
in the fall, hey, you're about to starve to death, so pack on the pounds, and then in the spring, you're lucky you survive, so pack on the pounds. Like really makes perfect sense. So, Dr. Gundry, how can people contact you if they want to follow you, get a hold of your information? I pre-ordered your book on Amazon already. What are the things that they can do?
So they can go to drgundry.com. They can go to gundrymd.com, which is my supplement and food company. They can find me on YouTube. I have 2 YouTube channels. They can go to the Dr. Gundry podcast, where I was happy enough to host you and let them get exposed to your wisdom and knowledge. Hopefully you see me waving from the internet when you're surfing, and hopefully you'll click on me and be entertained. So if I'm not showing up, I've done something wrong.
Entertained and informed. And what in the near future are you excited about?
Not a day goes by that we don't learn something that seems highly improbable. I have a little box in Gut Check about how we now know that the microbiome makes messenger RNA, microRNA, that is absorbed through the wall of our gut. And now there's proof that impacts our epigenome, our DNA, and actually tells cells what to do. So the idea that these guys are just a bunch of crap, now we realize that there is just this intricate communication system that we call it trans kingdom communication.
Mm.
That who would have imagined that these totally different kingdoms, the bacterial kingdom or the fungal kingdom, now can talk and control the animal kingdom. It's just like, wow. And the breaking down how that happens and what we need to give the microbiome the tools to talk to us the way they were supposed to instead of killing them off every day. So that's what's really exciting.
Yeah, and that just opens the door to all of these levers that can be manipulated, right? Whether it's prebiotic, probiotic, postbiotic, like what are the things that we can do? And it has a parallel. I think if I'm not mistaken, the largest organism on the planet. I don't know if it's a moss or it's like a tree moss combination, and it's just bizarre how huge it is. And I feel like
Sponge.
right, and I feel like the gut
Yeah.
biome has this parallel, right? It's intertwined with us in a way that we didn't know, and even that's fascinating that you've got these anaerobic bacteria we didn't know about until we could start mapping the genome, and like just such amazing stuff. All right. So you can find him at drgundry.com. That's DRGUNDRY. Did I get? Yeah. And then at gundrymd.com. And this has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with our audience today.
Thanks, Chris. It's great to see you again.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Live Beyond the Norms podcast. Make sure to subscribe and follow. Also, make sure not to be that guy, the guy sharing this podcast with people who are not interested in living beyond the norms. If you would like to learn more about the ESS60 molecule, the molecule responsible for the single longest longevity experimental result on mammals in history, a full 90% extension of life, visit myvitalc.com. That's myvitalc as in carbon.com.